Hello and welcome back to part 2 of 5-Minute Photoshop. This series where I'm trying to explain important features of Photoshop in a short, concise 5-minute or so video, and to help people get started using this powerful tool. And in part 1 I discussed some of the ways we can adjust the overall workspace layout to make things work properly for us. And in this part 2 I'm going to show you some of the hidden settings you need to change to make it work more effectively. So let's jump in and have a look at these. So previously we looked at the overall layout of the workspace, the tools that we have available to us, and that can be customized to suit your individual preferences. But in this part 2 we're going to look at some of the hidden features that are locked away behind another option menu. So to access this, we need to go to our top menu, go to Edit, we come down to Preferences, and let's click on the General panel, and here we have a number of areas where you're going to need to look at adjusting or changing some of these base settings, because as we know, Adobe likes to play games with us and not set this up optimally for photographers. So let's firstly look at how we're going to change and what we need to change. So under the general settings, we have a couple of different options here. We don't need to change any of these, but the image interpolation option is one that you would probably need to optimize to change, so that when you're enlarging or shrinking a photograph, you want the base option as to how the Photoshop is going to handle that to be determined, and we would check on bicubic automatic. That's probably going to give us the best results when you're either enlarging or shrinking a photograph. But bear in mind, if you're looking to upscale a photograph dramatically, doing it in Photoshop is not going to help you. You'll need some other plug-in program such as Topaz Gigapixel to do that. And this is just really how when you're making slight adjustments to the sizing within Photoshop. So that's the first one that you will need to change. And another one that I really don't like is this home screen, that when you open Photoshop it brings up a different menu with different settings. I'm really not interested in going there. I'm usually opening a photograph from Lightroom or some other raw processing editor directly into Photoshop, so I don't want to auto show the home screen, so I would untick that box, and then the other boxes I would just tick those. They seem to be the ones that work okay. And if you're looking at this and wanting to keep pace with this, I suggest what you do is hit the pause button that's at each of these screens. Have a look at what I've set. These are not absolutely the must-haves, but this is what works for me, and I think you'll find that these are quite useful. So having clicked on the general panel, let's click now down on the interface panel, and here you will see at the very top you'll see some options here for your color theme. If you chose black, I find that that's a bit too stark. I use the mid to dark grey. You could also choose the light grey. I find that that's a little bit too glaring as well, and if you go to the white one, that's also pretty awful. We'd go back to the mid grey, and then you have a highlight color default setting, or you can change it to blue. I just leave that on default. And then we have some other settings down here that are determined by either your operating system, or you can choose them here, such as the user interface font size. I've changed that to medium. We're working in English, we can do the scaling to suit the program, and I've shown you how you can change the size of these panels previously. And with these other ones, I would tick them as shown. So moving on to the next panel then, which is the workspace panel. These options are the ones that work. I would just tick those. There's nothing much else there that we need to worry too much about. And let's just have a look at the notifications panel, which is where you can see, do I want the tooltips when I hover over a tool, such as when I hover over here. We can't access that now because we're in this menu, but that's where you get your tooltips. You can have quiet mode, and you can tick these ones. They will show you overviews of new tools and things as you hover over them. I think that that's useful to leave in place. And more importantly, coming down to the tools panel, this is where we can find some really useful tools. The most important of which is if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel on it, you want to tick this box that allows you to zoom in and out of the photograph with the scroll wheel, because otherwise, if you don't use that, then you've got to constantly go back to the magnifier and click on that to zoom in and out. And using the scroll wheel is much more effective. You can use the animated zoom, that just makes it look a little bit better as you're zooming in. And you can use these tools down here. Some of these things are a bit of a gimmick. This flick panning is a bit of a gimmick where if you were zoomed in tight on the image and you wanted to move to the other side, it sort of animates that. I think that's a little bit of a waste of time, but let's have a look at what else we've got. So then moving on to the history and content credentials. This is where for published photographs you are working with a beta application from Adobe that allows you to embed some content credentials in your photo. I think for the majority of people you don't need that, so you could leave that turned off. And your export options, I would leave both of those turned off. They're not really much useful for us. But when we come down to the file handling, this is where things get a bit interesting, and we have some important options that we want to make sure that we've got covered. Now, we can look at all of these boxes here. This is the most important one. When you're working from, say, Lightroom, we are opening an image from a particular library folder, and you go into Photoshop, and then you want to save that photograph back in a TIFF or Photoshop format. Ideally, you want to save that back into the original folder, so you need to tick that box, and you want to tick this box that allows the saving to carry on in the background, so that you could be working on another image while that particular photo is being saved. And that saves a lot of time. And also tick this one, automatically save recovery information, because if you ever have a crash with the operating system or the program, you want to hopefully be able to recover what you've done, and it will save every 10 minutes. You can change that for, one every hour is not going to be much use, but you could save that to change it to 5 or 10 minutes. And you want to tick this box that enables you to the legacy save as option. And when you're saving a copy of a file, if you tick this box, it will say copy will no longer be appended to your file name. So if you're somehow saving a copy and you want multiple versions, I think it's useful to have that automatically apply copy to the file name when you're saving a copy. And then when we come down to our file compatibility, this is fairly important. Obviously, when you're using raw files, if you're opening files directly from Photoshop rather than going via Lightroom, it will open the file via Camera Raw and read the metadata from the file there. And you can use Adobe if you've got a 32-bit file, which is a high definition, a high dynamic range file rather. You can use that option. We don't necessarily need to use that much. And one of the other options is if you're saving a TIFF file, you may want to have the option of asking before saving a TIFF file with layers. If you're not interested in keeping those layers, you can turn that off. But one of the most important ones here is when you're saving Photoshop files and Photoshop big files, make sure that you choose always maximize the compatibility of that. That means that when you've saved a file from Photoshop, it will be perfectly compatible with Lightroom and Bridge, and you won't then get a message that says we can't read that file. So that's important to make sure that that is chosen. And the rest of those, well, you've got a couple of options. I don't use cloud documents, but recent file list, you can change that to how many, whatever files you want to have listed there, and 20 is plenty, and that's they're the important options within the file handling. So now moving on to the next one, which is the export options. We can tick a few options here, but quite honestly, you've got a number of options here: PNG, JPEG or GIF. If you're going to be exporting files and you're using Lightroom, it's much better to do this from Lightroom, although you can do it from Photoshop, but If you are going to, then I would suggest you make these settings here. Then you look at, if you're going to export, it'll ask you where you want to go each time, and it can add or show metadata on that file. You may want to add your copyright information, and often with quick export, you might be exporting something to be on a web page or to email. Then the lowest common denominator is using sRGB color space. You might want to tick that, and that is the main things in export. Let's jump now down to performance, because this can have an effect on how quickly your computer responds to handling some of the big files in Photoshop. And let's have a look here. Well, you've got how much of the memory usage, the RAM available on your system, and it will automatically set that. You can change that, and you can increase that. That will give you a little bit more performance. But more importantly is if you have a graphics card that has some dedicated RAM on that, you can use the graphics processor, and if you click on the advanced settings, it will give you some further options to help you improve the performance of your system. And then down here we've got the history states. When you go back and use this history tool on the toolbar when you're working on a photograph, if you're working on a very large file, you may have a lot of history states that you want to go back over, and you can see there you've got a slider. 50 is plenty, and you can go to those settings. I would leave those as they are. So they're the important ones for performance. When we come down to image processing, this is where you can set some default settings. And again, if you're working with your computer connected to the internet, you can use some of the AI tools that will process by default in the cloud, or of course you can process on the device. In this case, I'm leaving it on cloud. And when you have some selections options, you've got two options. You can have a faster selection or a more stable. Well, you want the better option in all of these options, so stick with more stable, and that's the options within image processing. So now moving down to the next option, which is the scratch disk, which is where Photoshop will store image data while it's doing some processing. And if you've got optional hard drives, you can choose there. If you only have the one hard drive, it'll be called the C drive. And you can see here that on this particular C drive, I haven't got a lot of space spare, so I'm using the D drive, which is a separate drive within my computer, and I've got plenty of space there, so I've nominated that as the scratch disk location. But if you don't have a choice, you'll have to just stick with the C drive. And so now moving on, cursors, I wouldn't change any of those settings. That's probably the default settings. Leave those as they are. We'll come down to transparency and gamut. There's nothing really there other than if you're looking at your print options and you're looking at the gamut warning, by default it shows it as grey. That seems to work most of the time, although of course you can change it by selecting that and then choosing a colour. I'm not going to change that. And moving ahead again, units and rulers. Well, in Australia we're in the metric system, so we would use millimetres. And we've got some other options here, and this is the presets for new documents. As I said earlier in one of my other videos, if you're using an Epson printer, you want 360 pixels per inch resolution. If you're using a Canon printer, you want 300 pixels per inch, and your screen resolution normally would be 72 pixels per inch, so that's fine. And then let's go now and have a look. There's another option here on your guides and rulers. You can change all of those, but I've left those all as defaults because that's way too many things to change and to think about. And let's quickly move on to the further options, such as plugins, and we can tick these boxes if you want to show them, but I'm basically allowing just the extensions to connect to the internet and to load those panels directly. That's all you need. when we come down to type, there are various options here. This is not important unless you're putting text on photographs, so I'm going to quickly skip over those. But again, if you want to have pause the video and look at those, that will give you a few other further options. And down here we can have a look at some technology previews. From time to time, Adobe will add some extra previews that allow you to try different things before they are formally released. These are the ones that I've ticked, and let's just leave those as they are and move on. And the product improvement, I chose not to participate because I don't want Adobe taking any of my photographs and using them for training their software. It's a privacy concern, but that's entirely up to you. So that's a quick run through all of those panels. Once you've ticked all those and made those changes, you will need to shut down and restart Photoshop to enable them to take effect. But quickly looking at some of these things, if we look at File, Open Recent, you'll get up to 20 images there, which is what we've chosen. We've got that animated zoom with the scroll wheel, and all of those other features will be applicable once you've done that. So that's all of the quick setup changes that we need to make to Photoshop to make it usable for photography. Thanks for watching, and come back for the next part.